Right, hello one and all. Welcome back. Today I've got something a little bit different for you, in as much as it doesn't lend itself directly to collecting, but as many of you will have noticed, this channel has more or less been turned over lately to vintage science fiction paperbacks. The reason for that is that I was bitten by the nostalgia bug and decided to read a few science fiction, and then it led me on to the thought that I'd like to get back a lot of the stuff that I got rid of way back in the 80s. Let's get back some of it and some others that I didn't have. And of course I've been putting those forward on the channel and talking about them to anybody that might be interested. But it occurred to me that there may be a few people watching, of the regular viewers who got a vague interest in science fiction but wouldn't really know where to start. And it's important, if you're going to get into something, to know exactly where to start. For instance, if you were thinking of getting into hard-boiled detective fiction, you would go way back to Dashiell Hammett, Philip, the character Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe, people like this, Raymond Chandler, who wrote them. And if you were into historical romance, you'd go back to Jane Austen and people like this. So today I'm going to present to you 10 science fiction books that I think would be ideal for people who have not read science fiction but would like to. So you might be thinking, oh, what makes me qualified to decide what you should read and what you shouldn't? All I'll say on that score is that I've read an awful lot of fiction, and I'm going back to a lot of the books that kind of ease me into the genre, which I read books for more than 20 years on a regular basis. So that's the idea of this video anyway. And like those instances I mentioned of the hard-boiled detective and the historical romances, there's absolutely nothing wrong with going back, way back in time to books that are rightly considered to be classics, even though they were written, in the case of the first couple I'm going to show you, in the late 1800s, because they will give you a grounding, a briefing in what science fiction actually is, without the clutter of modern technology, which comes later as you read more. Then you get into the more complex stuff like cyberpunk and and what have you. But anyway, enough jaw. I will show you these 10 books that I think might help you if you were thinking of starting to read science fiction. Now, the first of those is a very famous book, War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. It may seem an obvious book, but a lot of people know of it without having actually read it. And basically, it's the first recognised space invasion book. Really, it concerns the landing of the Martians in their tripods and the havoc that they wreak across England, which makes people fearful that they will never get back to the civilization that they knew. It's in language, it's a bit different to the science fiction you would read these days, a bit more sedate. But excuse me, I'm getting frog in my throat already. But it's a good place to start to realise exactly what science fiction is. And I'm going to couple with this, I haven't got a copy of it to show you, but for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to couple the Time Machine with this as number one. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, written, around about the same time, which considers the old head bashing idea of time travel. It just considers the adventures of someone who invents a time machine in the way back in time, and he goes to the far future and meets a couple of warring factions called the Eloi and the Morlock, as I remember. And I think it's more a satire on maybe the social structure of the Victorians. I don't know, but it's a good read, and as I say, it'll give you gently ease you into that idea of time travel, which can be quite mind expanding, if you like. Now, the second book is John Wyndham. These were the kind of books I was reading when I was 13, 14 years of age. Simply because Penguin Books were the only publisher that published science fiction. And John Wyndham was an author that I latched on to. And probably his most famous no, I think that's still Sean Connery there. His most famous novel is The Triffids, which is another alien invasion, so I thought I'd steer clear of that one. This is kind of an alien invasion, but of a different kind. It's about a village that gets knocked out for a day, and 9 months later, all the women found they're pregnant, and the result is 31 boys, I think it was, and 30 girls that were born with psychic powers, the ability to read each other's minds so they could act as a group. And presumably they were sent by the aliens as some sort of invasion force, and there were 3 other, I think, places in the world where this happened, but for one reason or another, all of those died. And this is a story of the group that landed in England. I won't tell you too much because I don't want to give you too many spoilers while mentioning these books to you. Now, when other publishers started to latch on to science fiction, this was one of the first books I read, Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, who is one of my favourite authors. Now, this is a book of colonisation of alien worlds, in this case Mars. But it's a series of interconnected short stories that many of them tell the story from the Martian point of view. And, I don't want to give too much away, so I'll just leave it there. But very good read. And as I say, you can read it. You don't need to read it sort of like as a novel and you can just read a story and then maybe the next story the next day. You don't have to invest a lot of time trying to read it all in one go as a novel. And the fourth one on my list would be Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. Now, this won the prestigious Hugo Award, 1959 maybe. And the Hugo Award is the highest honour you can get for a science fiction novel. They also give one for short stories, but we'll cover that later. This is a story of another great science fiction theme, war in the future. And it's a story of this group of cadets who got together to fight on an alien planet against what became known as the Bugs. Now because of Heinlein's politics, a lot of people distrust his science fiction. This was just thought as sort of like an allegory for war, whatever was going on at the time. But it's an interesting read. I can't tell you too much about it again without giving spoilers away, but needless to say, it's a seminal book in science fiction. Also, it's one that is sometimes described as juvenile fiction. I disagree with that. I don't think it's juvenile fiction. I think it's for, it's for adults. But that's the way it was marketed, apparently. But I would recommend you read that one after you read the other three, because it's a bit more involved. Then we move on to one of the grandfathers of science fiction, Arthur C. Clarke, who you'll all know from, of course, 2001. I picked this one over 2001: A Space Odyssey because it's a bit less complex. It's basically just about an alien craft. I think it's 30 miles long and 12 miles wide that arrives in the atmosphere, and they send a group of scientists up to see what it's all about. And they land on it and can't find anybody aboard. That's all I'm going to say. But it's, as I say, it's an alien story. It's not an invasion story, but it is a story about aliens, which bears reading. Again, I think this won the Hugo Award. Well, it won some award anyway. And another one that's well worth a read, and it's not too complex, given its subject matter. Now, this is I've got something invested in this book because, to my mind, it's one of the best science fiction books written. One of them. It would certainly be in my top half a dozen great science fiction novels. And it concerns the far future, where people have moved to the countryside, become very pastoral, because of the fear of nuclear war. And eventually, everybody moves off planet, apart from a few diehards, and the planet gets taken over by the robots and talking dogs. It sounds a bit ludicrous when you talk about it, but it really, I love this book. I'll just read you the synopsis off the back, and then I'll leave it there because I don't want to put any spoilers in. The cities of the world are deserted. As automation invades every sphere of life, human beings are rendered redundant and superfluous one by one. They abandon consciousness. The robots make spaceships and shoot for the stars. The ants construct huge buildings which sprawl over the remnants of the old townships. And the dogs take over the earth. That's all you need to know about that book. It's a wonderful book. I love it, and I would recommend it to anybody when they've read, a few of the basics. Okay, then we move on to one of the all-time classics. I've read this one, Foundation by Isaac Asimov. It was written in the 50s. I think it was a series of short novelettes, stories at the time, and then it was sort of like re-edited into one book, or three books. There's Foundation, the second Foundation and Empire, and Second Foundation, which is the first Foundation trilogy. I can't tell you too much without spoilers, but basically it concerns the hero of our book, Harry Seldon. He's what they call a psycho-historian, and he's predicted the fall of the Galactic Empire within so many years. I can't remember what it was. and thus makes a lot of enemies, in particular the Emperor, who doesn't want to believe it. And it's his story from there. Great book. They recently made a TV series of it, which I enjoyed also. But yeah, it's another one I would recommend you delve into when you've read those first 3 or 4 that I mentioned. Okay, now we move on to probably one of the most praised science fiction books of all time, The Star's My Destination by Alfred Bester. It's a story of a character called Gulliver Foyle, known as Gully Foyle in the book. It's a revenge tale because somebody leaves him adrift in this sort of like tin can in space. He's hardly got room to move, and it's the story of him trying to find out who it was. More than that I will not tell you, because again I don't want to spoil it. But yeah, it's well regarded by almost everybody, critics, other writers, readers. You know, they'll tell you, you ask them what their favourite SF book is. This will probably come in most people's top 3. Quite rightly too. It's an adventure novel, really. It's not space opera as such, but it's a good romping yarn, as they used to call them. So yeah, that's one I would definitely recommend to you. And the last of the novels I would recommend to you is this, Timescape by Greg Benford. It's another, it's a kind of a time travel story, but it's a time travel story that goes the other way. Without too many spoilers, basically it's about a group of scientists in 1998 who are living in this world that's not too great. Nuclear holocaust and all of that stuff. And they try to get a message. They're experimenting with something called tachyons, as I remember, and they use these to try and get a message back to scientists in 1962 so that they can avoid the mistakes that led to this horrendous world of 1998. It's quite a big book, and there's a lot of exposition in it, but I enjoyed it, and again I would recommend it as one you should read when you've polished off the others that I mentioned. It's not that complex given the subject matter, but it's not one that I would start on anyway. Let's put it that way. And then of course you have a lot of. I used to read a lot of short stories, and there are many anthologies I could recommend to you. But number 10, I would recommend, if you can find any of these new writings in sci-fi by Corgi Books. There's about 20 odd of them, 26, 7, I don't know. I've got quite a few of them. But basically it's featuring stories by authors who were writing sort of like new stuff back in the 70s, 60s, 70s. And it's not, there's nothing too complicated in there. So it's a good, introduction to short stories. New writings in SF. Now, as far as picking up these books, most of those that I've shown you wouldn't cost you an arm and a leg on eBay. If you're a Kindle reader, probably pick a lot of them up for next to nothing, actually. For instance, the Asimov one is a new printing of Foundation, and HMV have got a deal where you get 2. These are £9 each, and you can get 2 for £7. So if you can find another book to go with it, say, Foundation and Empire, it's going to cost you £7 for the 2 sort of like new books. So you could go that route, or eBay. You can pick up a lot of those books I would think for about 2 or 3 quid. So it's not going to break the bank. Now, just before we finish, I've got a couple of books that I would like to mention to you as something you could maybe get into, you know, when you've got a good grounding in science fiction. My favourite book, no doubt about it, this is my favourite novel, science fiction novel. A well-known book, 1984 by George Orwell. It's you know, a lot of the themes from the book have become kind of well-known sayings now, like Big Brother, Room 101, where, you know, you face your greatest fears. You know, they've moved into our cultural language. But the actual book itself, if you're not familiar, is the story of Winston Smith, a government employee who lives in a totalitarian state of the future as it was when it was written in 1948. 1984 was, you know, a good few many years hence. And this is a story of Winston who rebels against the state. He's employed to change history, in actual fact. You know, and a lot of the themes in this book echo strongly to this day, and you can see a lot of what Orwell describes in this book happening. You know, you've got people under surveillance, you've got, you know, CCTV on every corner. We haven't quite moved to the thought police yet, you know, but yeah, I mean, you know, without giving too much away, if you haven't read it, it's a book that's a must read, really. But as I say, it's one that, you know, maybe should be kept for when you know a few things about science fiction, shall we say. And likewise, this one, very famous anthology, Dangerous Visions by Heinlein. Basically, it was set up as a book of stories that publishers wouldn't print, normal publishers wouldn't print. I don't find them to be all that shocking or outrageous these days, but back when it was printed in the 80s, maybe they were. Yeah, if you're talking about short stories, I wouldn't jump into this one early doors, but Dangerous Visions is really a must read for anybody who's into science fiction at all. So yeah, those are my picks, folks. As I say, just a public service video for anybody who's interested, and thank you very much for watching. I hope you found something of use in there, and I'll be along with something else very soon. Bye bye now.